There's a certain comfort in that soft pop when you twist open a jar. It's a small sound, but it signals trust, a seal between factory and family table, between something made far away and the meal you're about to share. For decades, that seal meant safety. But lately, a few of those lids have been hiding stories no one expected. Inspections and recall notices have revealed cracks in the process, from jars filled with tiny fragments to seals that never fully closed. In the past year alone, multiple household names have faced quiet recalls most shoppers never heard about. You might even have one sitting in your pantry now, looking perfectly fine under the kitchen light. So today we're opening that shelf together, 5 brands that deserve a second look, and 2 that still live up to their promise. Because the glass may be clear, but what's inside isn't always what it seems. For Gedney pickles, I first noticed the jars stacked in aisle 1, the kind with cheerful red caps and bright green spears pressed tight against the glass. 2 lids sat slightly askew, tiny bubbles clinging to the brine line. It could have been nothing. But a small crack along the rim caught the light like a hairline fracture in trust. Those jars carried the Gedney label, a Minnesota classic, a brand that's been around for generations. In that part of the country, families grew up with Minnesota-made printed proudly on their pickle lids. Which is exactly why the FDA's recent Class 2 recall struck a chord. According to the agency's enforcement report, thousands of jars that were damaged and slated for disposal were mistakenly distributed to retailers earlier this year. A mix-up at a warehouse meant some of those compromised jars found their way onto shelves that looked perfectly ordinary to the rest of us. A cracked lid doesn't always mean danger, but when a seal's been broken even a few millimeters, the vacuum that keeps bacteria out is gone. Air seeps in, bringing microscopic life that doesn't belong there. In pickles, that means Clostridium botulinum and spoilage gases can form long before the smell changes. Inspectors noted that these compromised jars weren't immediately obvious to consumers. The fractures were often under the tamper ring or hidden beneath the cap's curl. To the eye, the glass looked intact. To the hand, the lid still gave that satisfying pop. That's what makes this story unsettling, the illusion of safety. We tend to trust the sound, not the seal. That pop has become part of American home life, the start of summer barbecues, late-night snacks, kids fishing out spears from the jar with a fork. But this recall showed how even an old-fashioned product made just miles from its loyal customers can slip. It wasn't about chemistry gone wrong or foreign ingredients. It was something smaller, damaged inventory mixed back into circulation, human oversight in a warehouse doing what warehouses always do, move product fast. One shopper in Rochester told a local station she noticed a vinegary smell stronger than usual when she opened hers. Another said the lid rusted from inside after a week in the fridge. Gedney pulled back the affected batches within days, working with the FDA to prevent more from reaching stores. The incident didn't spiral into illness or lawsuits, and that's the good part. But it did chip away at that old assumption that made local always means safe local. If you have Gedney pickles in your pantry, it doesn't mean you should panic. It means you should look closely. Turn the jar under the light. Check for a foggy, brine uneven seal, or that faint white line under the cap's curl. If you hear the pop, but see the leak, trust what you see. The worst problems are often the ones that still sound fine. The company says its quality checks have been retrained, its warehouses reorganized, and its sealing machines recalibrated. That's progress. But in grocery aisles across America, there's still a quiet lesson sitting between the mustard and mayonnaise. Every seal, no matter how familiar, deserves one extra glance. Still, you'll want to double-check every lid you bring home. The worst might be invisible. And just a few steps away, another jar tells a stranger story, one that started with a harmless ingredient and ended with an unexpected recall. ¿Tú es la Victoria salsa? Those tiny green flecks in a jar of salsa are supposed to mean freshness, bits of cilantro caught in a rush of tomato and spice. But for one batch this spring, a few of those specks weren't leaves at all. They were splinters. Wood fragments small enough to hide among herbs, sharp enough to matter. In April 2025, Megamex Foods, the company behind La Victoria Cilantro Salsa Medium, quietly issued a Class 2 recall after ingredient testing revealed that a contaminated cilantro supply had carried microscopic pieces of wood into the production line. The FDA confirmed the issue, foreign materials embedded during processing affecting multiple lots shipped to California, Nevada, Oregon, Washington, and Michigan. No major injuries were reported, But the recall noted the risk, clearly possible choking or dental injury. The irony was hard to miss. Cilantro salsa medium markets itself on authentic freshness, the kind of label that reassures you it came from a real kitchen, not a factory line. Yet the very ingredient that made it look rustic, those bright green flecks, turned out to be the flaw. Amid the blur of conveyors and mixers, the fragments slipped through. Automated filters aren't perfect. They scan for weight, not texture. A fragment that looks like an herb can pass for one. La Victoria's parent company, Megamex, moved fast once it learned the source. Within days, shipments were halted, distributors contacted, and recall notices posted. In turn, grocery chains started clearing shelves, although many jars had already been sold. That's the challenge with fresh-style salsas. Their shorter shelf life means turnover is fast, and by the time an issue surfaces, most of the stock is already in home kitchens. For consumers, this recall wasn't about unseen microbes or invisible chemicals. It was about trust in sight itself, what you see when you open a jar and stir it with a spoon. Those flecks of green, the sign of life and garden flavor, became a reason to hesitate. One local buyer in Portland told reporters she felt something crunch before tasting heat, only to find a pale shard between two tomato skins. She wasn't hurt, but she stopped buying the brand altogether. What stands out here isn't negligence, it's how fragile the modern food chain is. From field to jar, ingredients pass through multiple hands: growers, dryers, shippers, blenders, packers. A single cracked crate at a supplier in California was enough to seed thousands of jars with debris. Conversely, when that happens inside something labeled handcrafted, the sense of betrayal feels sharper. La Victoria reinstated the product weeks later with an updated filtration step and supplier audits. And by most accounts, those corrections worked. Still, the case leaves a faint aftertaste. If a speck can hide in salsa, what else hides behind our idea of natural? Because sometimes the danger isn't what's added, it's what slips in. For a brand whose name literally means victory, this recall was a quiet defeat. And it began with one harmless-looking leaf that wasn't. 3 Texas Olive Company. In April 2025, All American Trading issued a Class 2 recall covering several Texas Olive Company products, jars of pepperoncini capers and giardiniera, after discovering that hundreds of jars had not been properly sealed during production. The official notice described the defect: plainly improperly heat-processed acidified vegetables. Under those conditions, the vacuum inside each jar may never have formed. That single phrase, heat-processed, is what keeps shelf-stable food safe. Without that precise burst of pressure and temperature, air remains trapped inside the jar, and along with it, the bacteria every manufacturer works to keep out. In this case, inspectors confirmed that several batches had fallen below the required threshold. No illnesses were reported, but the classification carried weight: a potential contamination risk, serious enough to require a full product withdrawal. To the public, the news sounded minor: no visible spoilage, no broken glass. But inside, the plant engineers traced the problem to a misaligned retort valve, a metal gauge no larger than a coin. When the valve jammed, the retort chamber lost heat before the final sealing cycle completed. The lids closed, the labels went on, the jars looked perfect. What they lacked was pressure, the invisible barrier between preserved and perished. Thermal sealing is one of those industrial rhythms that rarely draws attention. Jars roll along the conveyor steam vents through the caps, a vacuum forms, and within seconds, the product is safe for years. Miss that balance by even a few degrees, and the math changes completely. In acidified vegetables, the pH sits just on the safe side of microbial growth. Lose heat, and that safety margin disappears. For that reason, the FDA treats every undersealed jar as a potential carrier of Clostridium botulinum, a bacterium that can grow in oxygen-poor environments. It is rare but powerful enough to warrant absolute caution. The recall covered shipments across Texas and Mississippi, small compared to national brands, but still significant for a regional producer built on reputation. Workers at the facility later told local media that new monitoring systems have since been installed: digital gauges, redundant sensors, and a requirement for manual checks every hour. In practice, that means more eyes on the same dials, a return to the kind of discipline that manufacturing sometimes forgets in pursuit of speed. Unlike previous recalls driven by foreign fragments or ingredient mishaps, this one had no villain beyond oversight itself. It wasn't a bad supplier or a spoiled crop. It was a moment when automation failed and no one caught it in time. And perhaps that is the quiet reminder hidden inside this story. Machines don't promise safety, people do. Today, the Texas Olive Company's jars are back on shelves, this time sealed under stricter supervision. The company says every batch log is double-signed, every pressure gauge recalibrated weekly. There's confidence in that routine and humility too. Because for every flawless product that leaves a line, there's a minute of heat and pressure standing behind it, the silent science of trust. When pressure drops in a line or in a system, someone has to notice before the lid does. 4 José Madrid salsa queso. Have you ever trusted a label so completely that you never looked twice? In December 2024, that quiet trust was tested by a jar of José Madrid chipotle con queso. The FDA announced a Class 2 recall after inspectors discovered undeclared color additives yellow number 5 and yellow number 6 blended into the queso without being listed on the label. It wasn't contamination this time, it was omission. At first glance, the product looked harmless. The same creamy orange spread, the same rustic label printed in warm tones. The kind of jar you'd pick up for a football game or a Sunday dinner. But what wasn't printed mattered more than what was. Under U.S. food law, any additive or artificial coloring must be clearly disclosed, especially when it poses allergy risks or restrictions for sensitive groups. In this case, those two colors can trigger reactions in people with certain sensitivities, and both require explicit declaration by name. When that declaration is missing even accidentally, the trust between manufacturer and consumer quietly breaks. The FDA flagged the error during a routine audit, a simple cross-check between batch formulations and printed labels. Somewhere between paperwork and printing, the ingredients list lost 2 lines. No foul intent, just a lapse in procedure that slipped through the system. Still, for the buyer reading that label, the message was clear: this product contains none of that. For one Ohio shopper, that assumption carried consequences. She told a local station she had chosen the brand specifically because her son reacts to yellow dyes. She'd read the label twice. No mention, so she bought it. When the recall surfaced weeks later, she checked her pantry, 3 jars were still there. None had caused harm, but the sense of betrayal lingered. "I thought if it's printed, it's true," she said. In fairness, José Madrid salsa did what most small producers would do under those circumstances: acknowledge, retract, correct. Within days, the company pulled the affected lots, rewrote its labeling procedure, and issued public apologies across its retail channels. The FDA closed the recall soon after, noting full compliance. Yet the story left a deeper mark not on the product, but on the perception of what handcrafted really means. We often associate small batch food with integrity, imagining that scale guarantees honesty. But as this case shows, transparency isn't a matter of size, it's a matter of system. Regulations exist not to burden producers, but to remind them that every printed word on a label carries the same weight as the food inside. For consumers, it's the only line of defense before purchase. For brands, it's the loudest statement of care they'll ever make. Beyond that, there's a simple moral honesty doesn't need marketing. It only needs presence, even in fine print. When a company forgets a single ingredient, it risks more than a recall. It risks the quiet erosion of confidence built over decades. But when it corrects the mistake transparently, that confidence can rebuild slowly the way trust always does, one clear label at a time. Because in the end, the cleanest ingredient in any jar should be honesty itself. Think Hudson Harvest tomato basil sauce. It started with jars that looked as if they were breathing lids, puffed upward glass sweating faintly along the rim. A few customers thought it was just heat from transport, but a week later, one of those jars cracked open with a soft hiss. The sauce leaked dark and thick, its scent stronger than it should have been. That was June of 2024. By July, Hudson Harvest had announced a Class 2 recall for its 16-ounce tomato basil sauce after multiple reports of swelling and leakage. The company admitted what consumers had already seen. Some batches were underprocessed, meaning the thermal cycle that ensures shelf stability hadn't reached the correct temperature. Unlike many recalls, this one didn't begin in a lab or at an inspection desk. It began in people's kitchens. Shoppers noticed, reported, and photographed the jars before anyone asked them to. For once, the warning wasn't hidden in paperwork, it was visible on the shelf. According to the FDA summary, the affected batches were produced during a stretch of unusually high humidity in upstate New York. That detail matters. When air carries extra moisture, It changes the pressure dynamics inside industrial kettles. A slight drop in temperature or delay in cooling can prevent the vacuum seal from locking completely. Most of the jars held, a few didn't, and those few were enough. Hudson Harvest acted fast. Within days, it pulled every suspect lot from retailers' email distributors and released a public notice that was clear and specific. No evasive phrasing, no delay. Swelling or leakage, the company wrote, should be treated as potential spoilage. It even posted photos of what to look for, something most brands never do. Transparency became part of the response. The recall stayed small, a few hundred jars at most, but the lesson it carried was large. In an age when most companies downplay defects, Hudson Harvest chose to amplify its own flaw. Customers who had complained earlier received apologies and replacements. Some even wrote back to praise the company's honesty. Technically, underprocessing can allow mild fermentation, producing gas that builds inside the jar until it bulges. The visual result is unmistakable, a gentle dome where a flat lid should be. It looks alive. And that's the irony, the sauce looked too alive to be safe, but that living appearance also saved people from consuming it. The product failed honestly in a way that told the truth. Even then, Hudson Harvest didn't hide behind the word isolated. Its public statement ended with a promise to review every heat chart, recalibrate equipment, and publish summaries of future inspections on its website. Few food brands make their corrections visible. This one did. By August, fresh batches of the tomato basil sauce were back in stores, same recipe, tighter process. And this time, customers noticed for the right reason the jars looked calm again. Flat lids, clear glass, the stillness that means safety. Because sometimes the most trustworthy product isn't the one that looks perfect. It's the one that tells you when something's wrong and gives you a reason to believe again once it's made right. When a company admits the jar is breathing, it's already chosen honesty over appearance. After all, for every recall and fractured seal, there's another story, one that doesn't end in apology, but in quiet consistency. Amid the headlines and warnings, some brands continue to do what others forget: test taste and tell the truth before anyone asks. These are the jars that never need defending, the labels that speak plainly, the meals that still feel safe. Because honesty once shaken can still return, not with promises, but with proof. So now let's turn from the faults that cracked our trust to the few that still hold it firm. 6. Rao's Homemade Marinara. Rao's Homemade Marinara doesn't promise purity, it proves it one simmer at a time. There's nothing flashy about it. No new label every season, no sudden limited edition runs. The recipe has barely changed in decades, and that's exactly why people keep reaching for the same red jar year after year. Inside, the ingredient list reads more like a sentence than a formula: tomatoes, olive oil, onions, basil, salt, garlic, and oregano. That's it. No starches, no sugar, no preservatives hiding between long words. The simplicity isn't nostalgic, it's discipline. Rao's doesn't make you believe in homemade, it behaves that way. Each batch begins with imported Italian tomatoes cooked low and long until the sauce thickens naturally, not by additives but by patience. The result isn't just flavor, it's texture. The kind of gentle density that clings to a spoon without clumping, the quiet richness that tells you time was spent, not saved. You can almost sense the rhythm of it, a slow stir, a pause. Another stir, the sound of someone paying attention. The factory where it's made is more kitchen than plant. Stainless steel, yes, but small kettles, careful heat, and people who still check viscosity by eye. The company doesn't chase faster or cheaper, it chases right. And when something's right, you can taste it, not because it surprises you, but because it doesn't. Every jar tastes like the last and the one before that. That steadiness builds a kind of quiet confidence. You open the lid and smell olive oil before tomato. You pour it over pasta and don't have to wonder what's inside. You know, there's a comfort in that certainty, the same comfort that once came from cooking at home, now bottled with care instead of compromise. Rao's doesn't talk about safety. It practices it. Clean sourcing, traceable batches, short ingredient chains, nothing to hide, nothing to excuse. They could print the recipe in bold letters on the front and lose nothing from it. In a world where all natural has become a slogan, this brand doesn't use it as a shield. It uses it as a standard. Notably, every independent test, from consumer watchdogs to culinary reviewers, finds the same thing: no contamination, no excessive sodium, no gimmick. Just the honest taste of tomatoes balanced with basil and garlic, cooked the way an older generation would have expected with time instead of shortcuts. You can smell patience before you taste it. And that patience is what sets Rao's apart. It's not competing for attention, it's defending tradition quietly by being consistent. There's no drama, no recall, no sudden reformulation to win back trust. It never lost it. At heart, that's the beauty of food done right. You stop noticing what could go wrong because everything feels exactly as it should. The jar stays still on the counter, its contents calm and certain, a kind of silent promise that doesn't need to be spoken. It doesn't make promises. It just tastes the same every single time, and that's enough. Set the Misetta Family recipes marinara. Some sauces remind you of dinner at home, not because of flavor, but because of feeling. You twist the lid and something familiar rises with the steam. The air smells like memory-ripe tomatoes, garlic, softening in olive oil, the faint sweetness of basil in the back of the room. It's not nostalgia reaching for you, it's care passed forward. That's what Misetta Family Recipes marinara has done for generations. Long before clean labels and farm-to-table became marketing terms, the Misetta family was already doing both quietly from their kitchen in California. They began bottling sauce in the mid-1930s when glass jars were still reused by hand, and every batch was stirred by someone who carried the family name. Nearly a century later, that rhythm hasn't changed much. The recipe itself reads like a Sunday ritual: vine-ripened tomatoes from family farms, pressed olive oil imported from Italy, California-grown onions, and herbs simmered slow until the sauce finds its natural thickness. The ingredient list is short enough to memorize, and that's part of the trust. Nothing hidden, nothing hurried. What makes it family isn't sentiment, it's repetition done right. You can see it in the small details: batch codes printed clearly on the lid, expiration dates never rubbed off, the quiet transparency of a company that knows its customers don't need persuasion, they need proof. And that proof sits quietly in every jar, waiting for the first turn of the wrist. Unlike many brands that scale up and lose touch, Misetta stayed close to its roots. The company is still family-owned, still headquartered in the same small town of Napa Valley, and still run by people who see food not as product but as connection. In interviews, they talk less about growth and more about continuity. That word matters. Continuity means knowing that what worked yesterday will still matter tomorrow if you care enough to preserve it. Each jar carries a bit of that legacy. You can almost imagine the hands behind it, steady, practiced, unhurried. There's no need to overfill or overflavor. The sauce doesn't try to impress you, it invites you. It feels lived in, like a favorite recipe card, stained in the corners but never rewritten. Taste it, and it's not about excitement, it's about reassurance. The acidity of the tomato is gentle. The herbs balance the texture, light but sure of itself. It's the flavor of knowing what you're getting and still feeling grateful every time you get it. Through the years, that consistency has become its quiet reputation. Reviewers note the same phrase again and again. It tastes the way I remember. That line in its simplicity might be the truest measure of safety there is, because something that never surprises you yet never disappoints you has earned its place. Misetta doesn't need to tell its story loudly. You can feel it. You can smell it. You can serve it to someone you love without second-guessing what's inside. And in a world of new labels and fast fixes, that's worth something rare: peace of mind. Because sometimes safety isn't about rules or recalls or warnings. Sometimes it's about care that refuses to fade. A steady hand stirring the same pot. A quiet flame that never goes out. The familiar flame. From cracked lids to quiet kitchens, we've seen how safety is never a guarantee, it's a practice. Each jar told a story, some of failure, some of repair, some of patient perfection. And through them all runs the same truth: food safety isn't only chemistry or inspection, it's intention. A broken seal can be fixed. A mislabeled batch can be recalled. But integrity once lost takes time and care to rebuild. The good news is, it can be done. Every honest brand, every clear label, every recipe made with real patience adds another thread to the fabric of trust. So tonight when you open a jar, maybe pause for a second. Not to worry, but to appreciate. Because behind every simple meal lies a chain of choices, and somewhere along that chain, someone decided to do things right. And that's what makes your dinner safe.
This video does not promote division within the United States or encourage segregation. All content is presented for the purpose of exploration, analysis, and fostering discussion based on current events, public sentiment, and social trends. We fully respect the United States Constitution and all federal regulations. If today's analysis made you think, drop a comment so we can keep the conversations going. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you will never miss our next independent deep dive.